You know who does a really good job with that too, if you want to make a little note? Pavarotti, Jay Embry, Pavarotti, he's done an awesome job. I mean, overall.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Listen to Pavarotti.
Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I am your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And I've been kind of out of it here the last week or so. Had a little bit of an eye infection, so I thought it'd be a good time to just kind of take a break. Especially, I'm kind of different than most other people out there. When all of the proverbial crud hits the fan, I like to sit back and watch. And I know a lot of people like to use that as the time to really ramp up production. Me, that's the time that I back off because I like to see what everybody's saying out there. Now, in doing that, though, I didn't really get a chance to watch, like the creators that typally report on this case. I like to sit back and watch the mainstream morons and see what kind of yarns they're spinning. And, watch the G's as they go out and try to do a massive media blast. And if you think that the G's aren't nervous right now, give me a break. I mean, they were on every type of podcast you could possibly imagine, from Sean Hannity to, major news networks to the drunk dog chew toy. All right. I mean, they went on everything, spewing as much nonsense as they could, trying to act like they really would like a trial and like the death penalty, but at the same time, over and over, declare how they don't want that to happen. And I can assure you they don't, because what this has really done, in my opinion, is affected their massive lawsuit that they have with WSU, and they know it. So they're doing everything they can to get out in front of it, trying to slow it down. They can't slow it down. And no matter how much, Steve G makes up, I mean, he's made up so much of the most ridiculous stuff here lately. I mean, I've just watch him and go, are you serious, man? He tries to say that the DNA on the knife sheath, there was a way where they could determine now that, the knife sheath was touched multiple times over a period of time. Give me a freaking break. There wasn't but two samples that they could pull off of the DNA on the knife sheath. One was 1.1, one was 1.4. 1.4, they declared Kaylee and Maddie, but excluded Brian Koberger from the mixture because they know there's Y DNA in the mixture. The other one was 1.1, and we all know 1.1 was one swab on the strap of the sheath. They used one swabbed the whole thing one time. That created 1.1. So you can't take one swab it one time, and then determine that DNA has been left there at different times. Give me a break. I mean, the lies that are coming out of the man's mouth right now are, just over the top. They're over the top. And you can't tell me that somebody's willing to go on and just start lying like nobody's business because they're not nervous. And they have every right to be nervous right now, because I firmly believe this thing's going where it needs to go. But also in doing that, now I've had a chance to sit back and look at some folks that I normally watch. Like I watched my guy Harsh last night, and he covered something that was interesting. Now he also covered, what was going on with Jules, and I think that's terrible. Nobody deserves that. So, and that email, as I watched, I switched it over and I watched Jules read that email that she got. And yeah, it sounds exactly like what Steve G leaves in my comments all the time with the same OGI, handle. So I can almost hear him saying it as she's reading it, which is, terrible. And let me just say this, for somebody that started a foundation, a charitable organization, if Jules was able to prove somehow that he sent that threatening email to her, it would destroy that charitable foundation. And he is a complete moron for sending that. Let me just say that. But in the same respect, during that same video that I'm referring to with Harsh, he was watching a video from a guy named Big Amish. And what's interesting is I watched them kind of cover the content of that video, is I see where their perspective is, and they're right about what they're saying to a certain extent. Now, what they want to do is give the power more to the Moscow PD and away from the FBI because of what they're talking about, which I highly disagree with. I believe Moscow PD was, they didn't know anything. I mean, they were just being led around like a bunch of little puppets by the FBI and other agencies, in my opinion. But I believe it's a good opportunity for me to put out a video that I actually did as a members only video a couple of months ago, maybe it's a month or so ago. And, I do several members only videos, and that's usually me going through and just investigating what I'm on that day. They may not have relevance to the conversation we're having on my main channel at the time. So sometimes I hold back on putting those out until something comes up that makes them relevant. So I am going to include that video in this one because I think it's very relevant to the conversation. Now, over the course of this thing, for people that have been with me for a long time, you know that I focused in on one aspect of this thing that is rarely ever talked about, because it's an aspect that I believe directly correlates to the parallel investigation that was going on that had a lot less to do with the crime on King Road, which I believe is directly tied to the crime on King Road. And that was the investigation that was absolutely going on into the trafficking group that was trafficking narcotics from Washington into Idaho all the way down to Boise. And they were hot on their trail right at the time that this atrocity took place. And we have identified a lot of the individuals in that group that have ties to the parents of the students that were unalived in this atrocity. And it has always been my determination that because of those interactions, because law enforcement was obviously forcing those parents to do things that they probably didn't want to do, it was a direct correlation and likely the cause of the atrocity. Nothing that the 4 victims did. I mean, I haven't seen anything to this day that tells me the 4 victims of the crime had any involvement in the trafficking organization that their parents were involved in. Zero. Their toxicology reports didn't come back for the kind of narcotics that was being trafficked, came back for Adderall. 2 of them didn't even have anything come back on their toxicology report. And I don't care how many of their friends give interviews saying, well, yeah, they did something 1 time or maybe 3 times in their whole life. Well, 3 times in their whole life certainly doesn't indicate that they're involved in any type of distribution network. Okay. In my humble opinion, I believe the students in the house were indemnified from the acts of their parents, but I believe the acts of their parents were absolutely not indemnified. And for some reason, something nobody ever wants to talk about, but OPOV, because it's the biggest red flag in this entire case. But the subject that I want to talk about was a tool that the feds used in this investigation from day one. And the only way they could use this particular tool is if this particular tool was already in place in another investigation, because convening something like this takes time, and they wouldn't convene it just for this crime. They used one that was already convened, already active, piggybacked off of it for a lot of the things that they discovered in this case that they don't want anybody to know. And let's listen to a clip from Harsh's video that'll kind of touch on this. And then I'm going to share that members video that I did a while back and show you the relevance. Hold on to your hats, folks.
Jurisdictional powers blended, or what BAM calls hybrid law enforcement. Local detectives are routinely deputized as task force officers under Title 18 and Title 21, granting them nationwide search warrant powers and direct access to federal intelligence systems. But notice the evidentiary trap. Officers must meticulously document which hat they are wearing during every search and arrest.
Because weren't they as well, like they even kept the names of some of the individuals who are involved in this out of it.
71 federal grand jury subpoenas. That is the sheer scale of nationwide compulsion under Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 17. Federal grand juries can compel financial and digital records across state lines instantly. But here's the catch. Under Rule 6E, grand jury secrecy is ironclad. That information cannot be shared with state prosecutors.
Good morning, members. You know, all this Ray talk has really got me kind of thinking of different things in this case now that we have so much more information, and then cross-referencing them with other cases that I've talked about in the past. And I know a lot of y'all that haven't been with me for a long time won't even really know what I'm talking about here. But for those of you that have been with me from the beginning, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And that's the fact that this is something nobody ever talks about. I think I'm the only one that ever dove into it. But in the Kohberger case, there was three grand juries, three different grand juries. There was a grand jury after Kohberger was arrested that they convened a federal grand jury in Pennsylvania, and they were trying to investigate Kohberger for other cases like that lady that went missing, and they found her in Pennsylvania after Kohberger was arrested. So for people that think that that had something to do with why the FBI was looking at Kohberger, they didn't even find her until after Kohberger was arrested. She was just a missing person. They would have never even thought Kohberger had anything to do with it prior to her finding her actual body. What was her name? I can't remember. But then they convened a federal grand jury, investigated, and he had nothing to do with that one either. But that's one that some people know about. And then most people know about the state grand jury that was convened after the arrest of Kohberger that indicted Kohberger in lieu of the preliminary hearing. That was just a state grand jury that they convened over a 3-day period to look at the evidence and decide to indict him. Everybody knows about these. The one that everybody just doesn't even have a clue about really is the secret federal grand jury that was used by the FBI. You see, the FBI, they can't just say, all right, I need a warrant for this, or let's get this and let's get this. They have to have a subpoena from the grand jury, from a federal grand jury, that gives them the power to get those things. And we know in the Kohberger case that, you know, Elisa Massoth was up there talking about the 50 grand jury subpoenas that was issued during the investigation and how they could not get them in discovery. And they would give them some of the warrant returns for those grand jury subpoenas, but they wouldn't ever give them when it was actually subpoenaed. So they could never get that. That was always blocked from them. But the fact there was absolutely a federal grand jury that the FBI was pulling from to get those subpoenas is something that they've kept hidden from everybody in this case. But we know it existed because we know that they got those subpoenas from them. So here's what I've been looking at. When we look at, especially as it relates to Ray, we know that Othram Labs had the DNA trying to do a family tree, but the FBI mysteriously on December 10th went to Othram and said, give me that information on the IgG, and then a black hole ensued from December 10th to December 19th when the FBI called, and this is how they try to word it. The FBI provided Moscow PD a tip. Right? They gave Payne a tip. That's Brian Kohberger. Look into him. As if the FBI was not all standing next to Brett Payne in the investigation. The FBI was co-located with Payne and team in Moscow PD. So it wasn't like the FBI called and gave Brett Payne a tip. The FBI called and gave themselves a tip. I mean, they were there next to Payne, all the FBI agents. So the FBI provided a tip to the FBI. Yeah, right. But we know that when Ray got on the stand in the pretrial motion, he was testifying that it was impossible for Brett Payne to file for a warrant on December 23rd for 48 hours of records for Brian Kohberger's phone. And then once he received the warrant, just like an hour later, file for a 6-month prior time frame for Brian Kohberger's phone. Ray knew that they had already obtained all that information. He just couldn't say it, but he was beating around the bush on the stand, basically saying he knew they had that information before Brett Payne ever filed for that warrant. Well, that means that the only way they could have had that information is if the FBI went to that federal grand jury, got Kohberger's AT&T warrant for 48 and 6 months, probably obtained his timing advance for that time frame as well. That's how the FBI would have got those timing advance records. And this guy right here knew it. He knew it the whole time. But here is what everybody misses. The federal grand jury that the FBI was getting to subpoena things, they cannot convene a federal grand jury in the time frame from the time that the FBI became involved in the investigation and this time frame right here. That federal grand jury was already operating. And we know that there was a federal grand jury already convened and operating in Washington at the time. Then when I look at this scenario right here, and I'm pretty certain that a federal grand jury got Kohberger's phone records between this time before they provided this tip to themselves, well, then it reminds me of another case that I believe is absolutely coordinated with this case. And I go back to Jesse James Bailey and the phone conversation that he was having with Bryson Gill, my guy that I suspect set this whole thing up. And Jesse was basically passing some information on to Bryson Gill. And this was an intercepted phone conversation. Gill says, "Hello, Bailey, yo, what's going on? I got a couple of my friends," and he said the situation, you got to remember when you're listening to this, by the way, this is, there's a lot of code going on in between Bailey and Gill right here. So taking it like the words really mean what they say is very hard to do because these gang members, they talk in codes. But he said, "I got a hold of a couple of my friends," and he said the situation that is going on is so they're going to subpoena you, and you're all going to have to go to the grand jury. Bryson says, and they're going to put you up on the grand jury, and they're going to start asking you guys all questions, and if you plead the fifth, they're going to smack you with 18 months on the spot. Then after that's done, they'll be like, "Okay, do you want to talk now? You know what I mean? And if you don't want to talk, then you're going to get whatever we decide." What do you mean by 18 months? Slapped with 18 months. That's what they can do for contempt of court. But who are they going to? What are they going to question us about? Whatever the investigation is. So Gill's like, "What do you mean? What are they going to question us about? Whatever the investigation is." He doesn't immediately go to, they're going to question us about the drug trafficking. He has no idea. That's what he said. That's what he's saying. That's what he said. That's what he's saying. He's passing on a message to Gill here. So it's somebody else that they're getting us to tell on? Yep. I would love to know what Gill and company testified to at that grand jury, because this is December 10th, the day that the FBI took the IgG from Othram Labs. And we know that federal grand jury was issuing subpoenas for Kohberger's phone during this time. And we just happen to have Jesse Bailey telling Gill he's got to go up to the grand jury to be a witness against somebody. It's somebody else they're going to get us to tell on. The time is just too coincidental. And it goes on to say, Bryson says, "And how long do you think that will take them?" Jesse James Bailey. "It just depends on what they got." He said if they have all the information that they need, then it'll move real quick. But if they're still investigating, then you may not hear about it for months. And he also say that for federal cases, there's a dude called the Honey Badger. And then there's a dude called Michael Stewart. Michael Stewart, that's a dude, you're the second person to say it, okay. So he's pointing to the Honey Badger, which I can pretty much figure out what the Honey Badger is. And then they talk about this guy, Michael Stewart. Michael Stewart apparently works with the Honey Badger, and he relays things to the prison gangs, y'all. Michael Austin Stewart, also referred to as Mike Stewart, criminal defense attorney based in Tacoma, Washington, practicing primarily in the Western District and Pierce County and surrounding areas. The law office of Michael Austin Stewart. His focus is serious criminal defense, including federal felony cases involving drug trafficking, firearms, gang-linked conspiracies, and multi-agency investigations like the OCD ETF cases. He's handled high-profile federal and drug and gun cases in the Western District of Washington. He represented defendants in large-scale federal drug trafficking rings, including cases with gang connections. Handled post-pandemic jury trials on drugs and firearms charges. Recent example, defense in 2024, federal gang-linked drug trafficking case involving fentanyl and meth, one of Washington's larger OCD ETF prosecutions. He has a reputation for aggressive courtroom advocacy in serious federal matters while being accessible to clients. I'll bet he's the go-between, because he is not listed as an attorney in any of the Aryan family or the Omerta group in any of their cases. This is the go-between between the drug trafficking organizations and the feds. He's the go-between between the honey badger and the actual criminals. And the honey badger, this is the first, I put this all into AI. It says this is the first concrete reference in the drug trafficking organization communications. It sounds like an internal nickname or a code for a person, likely a federal agent, handler, prosecutor, or cooperating witness. You can bet it's either a federal agent or a federal handler. They were both known to both Bailey and Gill. The way it's dropped casually, there's a dude called the Honey Badger, implies it was familiar to them in the context of their ongoing federal exposure. So it's all, in my opinion, one big thing. And what's crazy is they may have even used Bailey and Gill to testify falsely against Kohberger so the federal grand jury would issue subpoenas for those same FBI agents that later provided the tip. Because we know once they got their subpoenas and got his phone information, they should have known right then. Because they would have had his timing advanced. They should have known right then that Kohberger was not the one that committed the crime. But we're going to keep on digging. I just wanted to share that with you. Y'all have a wonderful day. So for those of you that have followed me throughout this journey, you know that we have investigated this thing so deep from start all the way to finish, to 2 years before, 2 years after, right up to the time when those Aryan Knights busted out of prison, drove 5.5 hours to one of the people that is connected to this crime, drove right to his front door 4 days after he was arrested for some reason, kidnapped a man that was innocent, and then drove all the way to Orofino and unalived somebody that just happened to have a lifelong boyfriend that lived in Clarkston about, 2 blocks from the Albertsons at the time. It's one big long thing. And eventually when we get enough information, we'll be able to put in the final pieces. And then I'll put this whole thing together in one congruent thing. A lot of people ask me all the time, hey, can you just go from start to finish and put everything together for your theory pod? Yeah, I will once it's done. Once it's all done, all the pieces are put in, I'll put it all together in one big whopping thing. But until then, I got to get a few more pieces of this thing put together so that it all comes together the right way. But let me know your thoughts. And please like and subscribe to this channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. Till next time, Pavarotti's out.